I'm Charlotte Collins, and at 50, I thought I'd seen every possible way life could surprise me. Standing in the endless line at Wichita's Autumn Food Festival, eyeing those last artisanal apple cider donuts like they held the secrets of the universe, I had no idea my world was about to tilt sideways. The October wind picked up, scattering leaves across the festival grounds. That's when she appeared. This stunning blonde with piercing blue eyes, clutching a stack of dissertation papers that the wind suddenly decided to redistribute across the entire food court. Half her research landed right on my worn hiking boots. "Damn it," she muttered, crouching down to gather the scattered pages. Her voice carried that slight rasp of someone who spent too many hours in dusty archives. I bent down to help, catching a glimpse of her work: Native American settlement patterns, historical migration routes. Academic stuff that would put most people to sleep, but something about her passion leaped off the pages. "You're researching indigenous settlements?" I asked, handing her a page covered in meticulous handwriting. "Sarah Brooks, and yes, sorry about the paper explosion." She tucked a strand behind her ear, a gesture that seemed unconscious but utterly captivating. "I'm trying to map how early settlers used natural landmarks for navigation." Charlotte Collins, Bird Guide. I watched her eyes widen with interest. "Those landmarks you're studying? The indigenous peoples chose them partly because of bird migration patterns. The flights guided them just like they guided the settlers." Sarah straightened, her stack of papers temporarily forgotten. "Are you serious? I've been struggling to understand why certain locations were chosen over others that seemed more geographically advantageous." We moved forward in line, the donuts almost within reach. I found myself studying her profile as she talked. Mid-30s, I'd guess. Academic intensity combined with something softer underneath. She wore that particular exhaustion of someone chasing knowledge at all costs. "The prairie chickens," I continued, "they have specific roosting patterns that indigenous peoples tracked for generations. Your settlers were just following ancient wisdom without realizing it." This changes everything about my research. Sarah's excitement was infectious. This might sound presumptuous, but would you consider guiding me to some of these locations? I could pay your standard rate, of course." The vendor handed us the last 2 donuts. Sarah insisted I take both since she'd technically cut in line, but I insisted we split them. Sharing those warm cinnamon sugar treats felt strangely intimate for 2 strangers. "I don't usually take clients on historical expeditions," I said, watching her take a careful bite. "My specialty is bird-watching tours for tourists." "Please." Her blue eyes held mine with startling intensity. "I've been stuck on this project for months. What you just told me in 5 minutes has unlocked more connections than I've made in weeks of library research." Something in her voice got to me. Maybe it was professional curiosity, or maybe it was the way she looked at me like I held answers to questions she'd been asking her whole life. Either way, I heard myself agreeing before my practical brain could object. 3 days, I said. "Meet me at Tallgrass Prairie Preserve. Early, 7 a.m. I'll be there." She smiled, transforming her entire face. "Thank you, Charlotte. Really." As she walked away, papers clutched protectively against her chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that this historical consultation was going to become something far more complicated than either of us anticipated. 3 days later, I found myself questioning my judgment as I watched Sarah stumble through the tall grass and designer hiking boots that had clearly never seen actual wilderness. But damn if her enthusiasm didn't make up for her lack of outdoor experience. "The settlers followed this exact route," she breathed, consulting her hand-drawn map while I led her deeper into the preserve. "They recorded seeing massive bird congregations here every spring. Still happens." I pointed toward a cluster of dead trees where red-winged blackbirds had built an entire colony. "The indigenous peoples called this place where the wings gather. Your settlers just translated poorly." Sarah stopped walking, staring at me with that intense academic focus I was beginning to recognize. "You know the original names? My grandmother was Kiowa. She taught me the old stories before she died." I rarely shared that information with clients, but something about Sarah made the words come easily. We walked in comfortable silence until we reached the creek I'd marked on her map. The hidden spot where I'd brought her wasn't on any official trail, surrounded by native sunflowers and prairie grass that rippled like water in the constant wind. "This is perfect," Sarah whispered, pulling out her camera. "The elevation, the water source, the natural windbreak. It's exactly what the documents described." While she photographed everything in sight, I unpacked the lunch I'd brought. Nothing fancy, just sandwiches and coffee from my thermos, but Sarah accepted the food like I was offering gourmet cuisine. "Tell me something," she said between bites. "How does someone become a professional bird guide in Kansas? Not exactly prime birding territory." I laughed, surprising myself. Divorce, messy one. Needed to get as far from my ex-wife as possible without leaving the state. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Sarah's eyebrows raised, but not in judgment. More like recognition. "Ex-wife," she repeated carefully. "So you're gay as the day is long." I met her gaze directly. "Problem with that, Professor?" "Hardly." Sarah's smile held secrets. My own divorce from Jessica finalized 6 months ago. Different reasons, but same basic premise. The air between us shifted, charged with new understanding. We weren't just guide and client anymore. We were two women who'd survived failed relationships, finding unexpected connection in the middle of nowhere. "What happened?" I asked, immediately regretting the personal question. "Sorry, none of my business." "Control issues," Sarah said quietly. Jessica wanted to manage every aspect of my life, from my research topics to my daily schedule. Eventually, I realized I was living her version of my life, not my own. Thunder rumbled overhead, and I glanced at the darkening sky. The afternoon storms came fast out here, and we were miles from shelter. "We need to move," I said, already packing up. "There's an abandoned homestead about half a mile west." The rain started before we made it halfway, turning the path treacherous. Sarah stumbled, and I caught her arm, steadying her against my side. For a moment we stood pressed together, rain soaking through our clothes, and I felt something electric pass between us. "This way," I said, my voice rougher than intended. The homestead appeared through the rain like something from Sarah's historical documents. Original log construction, probably built in the 1880s. The roof had holes, but the main room was mostly dry. Sarah explored while I built a small fire in the old stone fireplace, her historian's eye cataloging every detail. She traced her fingers along carved initials in the wooden walls, completely absorbed in imagining the lives lived here. "Look at this," she called softly. Someone carved a heart with 2 sets of initials, Mr. and L. I joined her beside the wall, our shoulders touching as we examined the faded carving. The rain drummed on the roof, creating an intimate cocoon around us. "They were lovers," Sarah whispered. "Has to be. The way the heart is positioned, hidden behind where a bed would have been." "Dangerous thing to carve in the 1800s, I murmured, very aware of how close we were standing. Sarah turned to face me, her blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "Dangerous things have always been worth the risk." The moment stretched between us, loaded with possibility. I could feel the warmth radiating from her body, smell her subtle perfume mixed with rain and prairie grass. My hand moved almost without permission, reaching to brush a wet strand of hair from her face. That's when the rain stopped as suddenly as it started, breaking the spell. Sarah stepped back, suddenly flustered, gathering her equipment with unnecessary urgency. "We should head back," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Lots of work to do." But as we walked back through the dripping grass, I caught her glancing at me when she thought I was looking, and I knew that moment in the homestead had affected her just as much as it had me. 2 weeks passed before I found the nerve to invite Sarah to my cabin. Professional consultation, I told myself. She needed a quiet place to organize her research, and I had maps she couldn't access anywhere else. Perfectly logical. My isolated home sat on 20 acres outside Wichita, surrounded by native oak trees and wildflower meadows. I'd bought it after the divorce, needing space to breathe again. Now, watching Sarah's car pull into my gravel driveway, I wondered if solitude had been overrated. "This is beautiful," she said, climbing out with her ever-present research bag. She wore jeans that hugged her curves and a soft blue sweater that made her eyes luminous. "How did you find this place?" "Sometimes you get lucky." I led her inside, suddenly self-conscious about my rustic furniture and mismatched dishes. "I thought we could spread your maps out properly, maybe grab some dinner." Sarah set her bag on my kitchen table, then paused to examine the framed photographs covering my walls. Pictures of rare birds, prairie landscapes, my grandmother in traditional dress. Is this your grandmother? She studied the portrait with genuine interest. Mary Crowfeather. She taught me everything about reading the land. I pulled ingredients from my refrigerator, needing something to do with my hands. Hope you like wild rice casserole. I like everything I haven't tried yet, Sarah said, then blushed slightly at her words. While I cooked, she arranged her historical documents across the table with academic precision. Maps, photographs, transcribed diary entries. The paper trail of forgotten lives. Wine? I offered, pulling a bottle from my cabinet. God, yes. This research is making me crazy. I poured generous glasses of red wine, and we settled into reviewing her work. Sarah's passion transformed her face as she explained migration patterns and settlement choices, her hands moving expressively as she talked. The connection between bird routes and human movement patterns is revolutionary, she said, leaning closer to show me a particular map. No one's made this correlation before. Her enthusiasm was infectious, but I found myself watching her lips more than listening to her words. The wine was helping neither my concentration nor my growing attraction. You're not listening, she accused, catching my wandering attention. I'm listening to something different, I admitted, the wine making me bold. Sarah's breath caught. What are you listening to? The way your voice changes when you're excited about something. The little pause you make when you're thinking. The sound you made when you tasted that wine. She set down her glass carefully, her blue eyes searching my face. Charlotte, I should tell you something. I've never been attracted to someone 15 years older. Past tense? Present tense is more complicated. She moved closer on the couch we'd migrated to. I keep thinking about that moment in the homestead. About those initials carved in the wall. Mr. and L, I murmured. They risked everything for love. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. Sometimes I wonder what that kind of certainty feels like. The space between us charged with electricity. I could smell her perfume, see the gold flecks in her eyes, feel the heat radiating from her skin. Maybe like this, I said, reaching up to touch her cheek. Sarah leaned into my palm, her eyes fluttering closed. I've been thinking about kissing you for days. What's stopping you? Instead of answering, she eliminated the distance between us. Her lips met mine softly at first, tentative and questioning. I responded by threading my fingers through her silky hair, deepening the kiss until we were both breathless. When we finally broke apart, Sarah rested her forehead against mine. That was worth the wait. Was it what you expected? Better. She traced her thumb along my lower lip. Much better. The candles I'd lit earlier flickered in their holders, casting dancing shadows across the maps spread on my table. Research forgotten, we sat wrapped in each other's arms, the October wind, rattling my windows while we explored this new territory between us. I should probably go, Sarah said eventually, though she made no move to leave. You should, I agreed, pulling her closer. Long drive back to town. Very long drive. Neither of us moved. Outside, an owl called across the meadow, and I realized I'd never brought anyone to this place before. My sanctuary had always been mine alone. Stay, I whispered against her hair. Just until morning. Sarah pulled back to look at me, her expression serious. If I stay, this changes everything between us. Maybe it's time for things to change. She answered by kissing me again, deeper this time, full of promise and possibility. Whatever professional boundaries we'd maintained for the past weeks dissolved completely in that moment, leaving us as simply two women who'd found something unexpected in the Kansas prairie. Sarah left my cabin at dawn, and I spent the morning replaying every moment of the previous night. The way she'd curled against me on the couch, how her breath felt against my neck when she finally fell asleep in my arms. I was still lost in those memories when Marcus knocked on my door. You look like hell, my old friend announced, inviting himself in for coffee like he'd done for the past 5 years. Marcus had been guiding tourists through Kansas wilderness longer than anyone, and his weathered face told stories of decades under the prairie sun. More importantly, he'd been the first person to welcome me when I'd arrived in Wichita broken and angry after my divorce. Rough night, I said, pouring him coffee from the pot I'd made for Sarah hours earlier. Heard you've been spending time with that historian from the university. His tone carried warning. Pretty blonde, asking lots of questions around town. I tensed. What kind of questions? The kind her ex-girlfriend's been asking too. Marcus settled into my kitchen chair with the authority of someone delivering important news. Jessica something. Been nosing around the coffee shops, asking about your quote-unquote friendship with Sarah. The peaceful morning evaporated. What's she saying? Nothing direct, just dropping hints that Sarah's not ready for anything serious, that she's rebounding hard from their relationship. Marcus studied my face carefully. Seemed mighty interested in your personal business for someone who doesn't know you. I set down my coffee cup harder than necessary. Sarah's a grown woman. She can make her own choices. Can she? Because word around town is this Jessica character's been putting pressure on Sarah's academic career. Subtle stuff, but effective. Before I could respond, Sarah's car pulled into my driveway again. Through the window I could see her face was pale, strained. Something had happened. I'll leave you two alone, Marcus said, grabbing his hat. But Charlotte? Be careful. Academic politics can get nasty, especially when ex-lovers are involved. Sarah practically fell into my arms the moment Marcus left, her entire body shaking. I held her close, breathing in her familiar scent while questions churned in my mind. What happened? I asked softly. Jessica showed up at my apartment last night. Sarah's voice was muffled against my shoulder. After I got home from here. Ice formed in my stomach. What did she want? Sarah pulled back to look at me, tears threatening in her blue eyes. She knows about us, about you. She demanded I end things immediately or she'll sabotage my tenure application. Can she do that? She's on 3 different academic committees, has connections I'll never have. Sarah's hands trembled as she wiped her eyes. She said my association with you makes me look unstable, unprofessional. Rage started building in my chest. Some entitled academic, thinking she could manipulate Sarah's life from the shadows. What did you tell her? That she had no right to make demands about my personal life. That our relationship was over. Sarah's voice grew stronger. But Charlotte, she's not going to stop. Jessica doesn't accept rejection well. I guided Sarah to my porch swing. The October morning still cool enough to require the blanket I kept outside. We sat wrapped together, watching the prairie grass bend in the wind while I processed this new threat. Maybe she's right about one thing, Sarah said quietly. What? Maybe I'm not ready for this. For us. She turned in my arms to face me directly. I've never felt as understood as I do with you. Never felt this safe, this seen. But Jessica's right that I'm still figuring out who I am outside that relationship. The honesty in her voice cut deeper than any of Jessica's threats. Are you saying you want to end this? I'm saying I'm terrified of losing my career over something that might not survive anyway. Sarah's tears finally spilled over. And I'm terrified of losing you because I'm too much of a coward to fight for what I want. I pulled her closer, feeling her heart hammering against my chest. Above us, the oak trees rustled in the wind. And somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark called its liquid song. Then let's figure it out together, I said, tilting her chin up to meet my eyes. Jessica doesn't get to decide what's best for your life. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. I brushed tears from her cheeks with my thumbs. Do you want to be with me? Yes, she whispered without hesitation. Then, we fight for it. Sarah searched my face, looking for certainty I hoped I was projecting. What if I lose everything? Then we build something new. The kiss she gave me then was desperate, grateful, full of promises neither of us was sure we could keep. But sitting on that porch swing with Sarah in my arms, watching the endless Kansas sky stretch toward the horizon, I realized I was ready to risk everything for this woman who'd stumbled into my life at a food festival 3 weeks ago. When we finally broke apart, Sarah rested her head on my shoulder. Stay with me tonight, at my place? I don't want to be alone. Of course. As we sat there planning our evening, neither of us noticed the car parked at the end of my long driveway, or the figure behind the wheel taking photographs of us wrapped together on my porch swing. That weekend, Sarah asked me to help clean out her deceased grandmother's attic for her research project. Her grandmother's house sat in an older neighborhood of Wichita, where mature elm trees created tunnels of shade over cracked sidewalks and front porches held decades of family secrets. Grandma Rose left me everything, Sarah explained, climbing the narrow attic stairs ahead of me. But I haven't had the courage to go through her things until now. The attic smelled of lavender and old paper, dusty sunbeams filtering through a single window. Cardboard boxes and furniture covered in white sheets created a maze of forgotten memories. What exactly are we looking for? I asked, surveying the organized chaos. Documents, photographs, anything that might relate to local history. Sarah pulled the sheet off an ornate oak desk. Grandma Rose lived here her entire life. If anyone documented this area's social changes, it would be her. We worked in comfortable silence, sorting through boxes of Christmas decorations, old clothing, and stacks of recipe cards written in faded ink. I found myself stealing glances at Sarah as she examined each item with academic thoroughness. "Charlotte, look at this." Sarah held up an ornate wooden box, about the size of a jewelry case but heavier, with intricate carvings along the edges. The wood was dark with age, polished smooth by countless hands. "It was hidden behind these other boxes," she said, setting it carefully on the desk. "There's no lock, but it feels important." The hinges creaked as she opened it, revealing bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon. Dozens of them, written on cream-colored paper in 2 different hands. The envelopes were addressed simply, "My darling and my heart." Sarah lifted one bundle carefully, her historian's instincts taking over. "These are old. 1940s, maybe earlier." She untied the ribbon and unfolded the first letter. As she read, her expression changed from curiosity to amazement to something approaching awe. "What is it?" I asked, moving closer to read over her shoulder. "Listen to this," she said, her voice hushed with discovery. "My dearest Margaret, every moment away from you feels like a lifetime. I count the hours until I can hold you again, until I can taste your lips and lose myself in your embrace." The letter was signed "Forever yours, Eleanor." We stared at each other, the implications sinking in. Love letters between 2 women, hidden in an attic for over 70 years. "There are dozens more," Sarah whispered, lifting another bundle. "Margaret and Eleanor. They were lovers." As we read more letters, the story emerged. Margaret worked as a seamstress in downtown Wichita, while Eleanor taught at the local elementary school. Their relationship had to remain completely hidden, their meeting secret, their love expressed only in these passionate letters. The dates span 3 years, Sarah noted, her academic mind mapping the timeline. From 1943 to 1946. Then they just stop. A chill ran through the attic despite the October warmth outside. Something about the abrupt ending felt ominous. "Maybe they were discovered," I suggested. "Had to end things for safety." But as we continued reading, a different picture emerged. The final letters spoke of plans to leave Wichita together, to start new lives where they could be open about their love. Eleanor's last letter was dated October 15, 1946. "Pack only what you need, my darling. Tomorrow we leave this place forever." They were going to run away together, Sarah breathed. But what happened? That's when the temperature in the attic dropped noticeably. Not the gradual cooling of evening, but a sudden sharp cold that made our breath visible in the dusty air. The wooden box slammed shut by itself. Sarah and I jumped back, hearts racing. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the sound of our rapid breathing. "Wind?" I suggested weakly, though there hadn't been any wind. Sarah approached the box cautiously and tried to open it again. The lid wouldn't budge, as if an invisible hand held it closed. "This is impossible," she muttered, applying more pressure. Finally it opened with a sharp crack. The letters were exactly as we'd left them, but now a distinct scent filled the air. Vintage perfume. Something floral and sophisticated that hadn't been manufactured in decades. "Do you smell that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my grandmother's teachings about spiritual presences suddenly feeling very relevant. "We should go. Now." But Sarah the historian was more intrigued than frightened. What if they're trying to tell us something? What if their story isn't finished? As if in response to her words, one of the letters fluttered to the floor by itself, landing open, to reveal a hand-drawn map of downtown Wichita with an X marked near the old train station. They're showing us where to look, Sarah said with growing excitement. Charlotte, what if they never made it out of town? What if something happened to them here? The perfume scent grew stronger, and now I could swear I heard whispers, in the shadows, too faint to understand but definitely present. Sarah, I said carefully, taking her hand. My grandmother always said that restless spirits stay earthbound when they have unfinished business. Then maybe it's time someone finished it for them. As we carefully packed the letters back in their box, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd just inherited more than historical documents. We'd become part of Margaret and Eleanor's story, whether we wanted to or not. The supernatural activity at Sarah's apartment escalated over the next week. Doors opened on their own in the middle of the night. Books fell from shelves without explanation. The scent of vintage perfume appeared whenever we tried to research Margaret and Eleanor's fate, as if they were guiding us toward the truth. But the ghostly presence wasn't our only problem. Jessica was making good on her threats. Dr. Peterson wants to see me tomorrow, Sarah said, pacing my cabin's living room like a caged animal. The department head never calls individual meetings unless there's a serious issue. I watched her move, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept running her hands through her blonde hair. 3 nights of supernatural occurrences had left us both exhausted, but Sarah bore the additional stress of Jessica's campaign against her career. What's she telling them? I asked. That I'm having some kind of breakdown, that I'm obsessed with paranormal nonsense instead of legitimate historical research. Sarah's laugh held no humor, which, given recent events, might not be entirely inaccurate. You're not having a breakdown. You're uncovering history that someone tried to bury. My research into Margaret and Eleanor had yielded disturbing results. Eleanor Hutchins had indeed disappeared in October 1946, right around the planned escape date. The official police report claimed she'd simply left town, but her teaching position was filled immediately, and her belongings were cleared from her boarding house within days. Margaret Riley's fate was even more mysterious. She'd vanished the same week, her seamstress job abandoned mid-commission. No forwarding address, no contact with family, no trace of either woman beyond October 1946. They never made it out of Wichita, I told Sarah. Someone stopped them. We drove to the old cemetery that evening, following the map from Eleanor's letter. The Riverside Cemetery dated back to the 1880s. It's weathered. Headstones telling stories of prairie pioneers and forgotten dreams. Finding Margaret's grave took an hour of searching through overgrown sections where the poorest residents were buried. Finally, Sarah spotted it. A small, unmarked stone, with only Mr. 1946 bent carved into the granite. She's here, Sarah whispered, kneeling beside the modest grave. But where's Eleanor? The question hit us both with sudden clarity. 1 grave, 2 missing women. Eleanor wasn't just missing from the historical record. She was missing, period. They killed her, Sarah said, her voice breaking. Someone discovered their plan and killed Eleanor to stop them from leaving together. The injustice of it overwhelmed me. 2 women who'd found love in an impossible time, whose only crime was wanting to build a life together, destroyed by a society that couldn't accept their love. Sarah's tears came then. Not just for Margaret and Eleanor, but for every woman who'd ever been forced to hide her heart. I knelt beside her in the fading daylight, pulling her into my arms as she sobbed against my shoulder. They deserved better, she cried. They deserved to live freely, to love openly. They did, I agreed, feeling my own tears start, and so do we. Sarah pulled back to look at me, her blue eyes bright with tears and determination. Jessica doesn't get to destroy what we have. These women lost everything, but we don't have to. The emotion in her voice, the fierce protectiveness I heard there, broke down every wall I'd built around my heart. This brilliant, passionate woman was fighting for us against forces trying to tear us apart, just like Margaret and Eleanor had tried to fight. I framed her face with my hands, thumbs brushing away her tears. I love you. The words came out raw, honest, carrying all the fear and hope I'd been holding back. Sarah's breath caught, her eyes searching mine. I love you too, she whispered. I'm scared to death of it, but I love you. Our kiss there beside Margaret's grave was desperate, hungry, full of all the emotion we'd been holding back. When we finally broke apart, we were both shaking. Come home with me, Sarah said, her voice husky with desire and determination. "I'm done hiding from Jessica, from anyone. I want to be with you tonight." The drive to Sarah's apartment was charged with electricity. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every moment of anticipation building the tension between us. Her apartment still carried traces of that vintage perfume, but now it felt like a blessing rather than a haunting. As if Margaret and Eleanor were giving us permission to claim the love they'd been denied. Sarah's hands shook as she unlocked her door, and I caught them in mine, steadying her. Inside, candles flickered to life without anyone lighting them, casting dancing shadows across the walls. We made love slowly, reverently, as if we were honoring not just our own desires, but the love that had been stolen from two women 70 years ago. Sarah's skin was silk beneath my hands, her quiet gasps and whispered endearments the most beautiful sounds I'd ever heard. Afterward, we lay entwined in her bed, the mysterious perfume surrounding us like a gentle embrace. For the first time since we'd found those letters, the supernatural presence felt peaceful rather than restless. "They're at peace now," Sarah murmured against my shoulder. "They know their story will be told." Outside her window, the October night was still and quiet. No doors opened on their own, no books fell from shelves. The spirits had found what they'd been searching for all these decades. Someone to remember their love, to honor their sacrifice, to ensure they weren't forgotten. And we'd found something too. In fighting for Margaret and Eleanor's memory, we'd learned to fight for our own love. Jessica's escalation came the next morning with a phone call that changed everything. Sarah's hands trembled as she answered, and I watched her face drain of color during the brief conversation. "She has photographs," Sarah said after hanging up, "of us together at your cabin. She's threatening to send them to the tenure committee with claims about my mental instability." My blood turned to ice. "What kind of photographs?" "Us on your porch swing, the morning after our first night together." Sarah sank into her kitchen chair. "She says if I don't end our relationship immediately, she'll destroy my academic career, with evidence of my, quote, inappropriate associations and psychological breakdown." The calculated cruelty of it made me want to drive straight to Jessica's apartment and have a very direct conversation. But Sarah needed strategy, not my protective anger. "She's bluffing," I said, though uncertainty gnawed at me. Personal relationships aren't grounds for denying tenure. They are when combined with claims about supernatural obsessions and professional instability. Sarah's voice was hollow. "She's been building a case against me for weeks." That afternoon, while Sarah taught her classes, I drove to the Tribal Cultural Center where my grandmother had worked for decades. If anyone understood the spiritual aspects of what we'd experienced, it would be Elder Joseph Crowdog, my grandmother's oldest friend. "Charlotte, child," the elderly man greeted me in Kiowa. "You carry troubled spirits." I explained about the letters, the supernatural activity, and Sarah's family connection to the mysterious women. Elder Joseph listened without interruption, his weathered face grave. "Your grandmother told you about bloodline connections," he said finally. "The spirits called to this woman because she shares their blood. This Eleanor was her ancestor." "How can you be sure?" "The signs are clear. Restless spirits seek family to complete unfinished tasks." He studied me carefully. "You must help her honor their story properly. Only then will they find peace." Armed with this information, I spent hours at the local records office, tracing Sarah's family genealogy backward. The connection emerged in faded birth certificates and marriage records. Eleanor Hutchins was Sarah's great-great-aunt, her grandmother's sister, who had vanished from family history after 1946. When Sarah returned to her apartment that evening, I was waiting with documents spread across her table like a paper trail to the past. "Eleanor was your great-great-aunt," I announced. "Rose's older sister. That's why the spirits reached out to you specifically." Sarah stared at the genealogical evidence, pieces falling into place. Grandma Rose never mentioned having a sister. Because Eleanor was erased from family history when she disappeared. Too shameful to acknowledge, too dangerous to remember. The phone rang, interrupting our discovery. Jessica's voice came through the speaker, cold and precise. "Have you made your decision, Sarah? End this ridiculous relationship, or face the consequences tomorrow." Something in Sarah's expression hardened. The fear I'd seen for weeks transformed into determination. "I've made my decision," she said clearly. "I'm filing harassment charges against you tomorrow morning. I have witnesses to your threats, evidence of your stalking behavior, and documentation of your attempts to sabotage my career." Silence stretched across the phone line before Jessica's voice returned, venomous now. "You'll regret this. The only thing I regret is wasting 2 years of my life with someone who thinks love is about control." Sarah's voice grew stronger with each word. "We're done, Jessica. Completely and permanently done." She hung up before Jessica could respond, then turned to me with fierce pride shining in her blue eyes. "I'm tired of letting other people decide what my life should look like," she said. "Margaret and Eleanor lost their chance at happiness because society wouldn't let them choose love. I'm not losing mine." The kiss she gave me then was different from all the others. Not desperate or questioning, but confident and claiming. The kiss of a woman who'd finally decided to fight for what she wanted. "Whatever happens with the tenure committee, we'll face it together," she said against my lips. "Together," I agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss. That night, as we lay in bed surrounded by the mysterious perfume that had become our blessing, rather than our haunting, I felt something shift in the spiritual energy around us. The presence that had been guiding us toward their truth now felt lighter, more peaceful. "They're proud of us," Sarah whispered in the darkness. "Eleanor and Margaret, they're proud we chose differently than they could." Outside her apartment, an unseasonable October storm began building, lightning illuminating the windows. But inside, wrapped in each other's arms and surrounded by the love of two women who'd lost their chance 70 years ago, we felt completely safe. The worst of Jessica's threats were behind us now. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but we'd face them as partners, who'd learned that love worth having was love worth fighting for. The supernatural activity reached its crescendo that very night, as if Margaret and Eleanor sensed our newfound resolve to fight for our love. The temperature in Sarah's apartment plummeted, and the vintage perfume became so strong it was almost overpowering. "They're trying to tell us something urgent," Sarah said, watching her breath form clouds in the suddenly frigid air. Books flew open to specific pages. Candles lit themselves in precise patterns, and the wooden box containing their letters vibrated on the kitchen table. When Sarah approached it, the lid opened to reveal a letter we hadn't seen before, hidden beneath the others. "This one's different," she said, unfolding the aged paper carefully. "It's not from Eleanor to Margaret. It's addressed to whoever finds their story." Her voice shook as she read aloud. "To the one who comes after us, who finds our love in hidden places. We were discovered by those who could not bear our happiness. Eleanor is gone, taken from me forever. But our love lives on in these words. Honor our memory by living the freedom we were denied." The letter was signed Margaret Riley, October 1946, in shaky handwriting that spoke of grief beyond measure. "She knew someone would find this eventually," I whispered. "She wanted their story preserved." As Sarah finished reading, a warmth filled the room despite the supernatural. Cold, and I felt a presence I recognized from my grandmother's teachings. Not just Margaret and Eleanor now, but a gathering of spirits who'd been denied love, denied freedom, denied the right to exist authentically. "We need to honor them properly," I said, understanding flooding through me, like my grandmother taught me. "We need to visit their resting place and perform a ceremony." We drove to Riverside Cemetery at midnight, the October wind howling through bare tree branches. Sarah carried the wooden box while I brought sweetgrass and sage from my grandmother's medicine bundle. Finding Margaret's unmarked grave in the darkness took time, but the spirits guided us through whispered voices and the scent of vintage perfume growing stronger as we approached the right location. "Eleanor's here too," Sarah said suddenly, kneeling beside the simple headstone. "I can feel her presence." I lit the sage, letting its smoke carry our intentions to the spirit world. "Margaret Riley and Eleanor Hutchins, we see you. We honor your love. We promise your story will be told." The wind died completely, and in that perfect stillness I heard my grandmother's voice as clearly as if she stood beside us. "Help them cross over, granddaughter. Their work here is finished." Sarah began speaking then, her historian's voice carrying across the silent cemetery. "Margaret and Eleanor, you were brave women who loved in spite of laws and prejudice that said you shouldn't exist. Your love was real, valid, beautiful. We carry it forward in our own hearts." As she spoke, lights began appearing around us. Not harsh electric lights, but soft, warm glows that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. Dozens of them, representing all the souls who'd lived and loved in secret, who'd been erased from history but not from memory. "Your sacrifice matters," I added, the words coming from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. "Because of your courage to love authentically, even when it cost everything, we learned to fight for our own happiness." The lights grew brighter, and suddenly the air filled with whispers. Not frightening now, but grateful. "Thank you. Thank you. Remember us. Tell our stories." Sarah reached for my hand, and the moment our fingers touched, the spiritual presence around us shifted from restless to peaceful. Margaret and Eleanor's love story was finally complete, witnessed and honored by two women who'd learned from their example. A week later, Sarah received notification that her tenure application had been approved. The committee was particularly impressed by her groundbreaking research into hidden LGBTQ history in Kansas, calling it revolutionary scholarship that would reshape historical narratives. Jessica's harassment charges backfired spectacularly when several other women came forward with similar experiences, and she was quietly asked to resign from her academic positions. But the real victory came that evening in my cabin, when Sarah officially moved her research materials into my spare room. We'd created something Margaret and Eleanor never could, a life together, open and unashamed. "They're at peace now," Sarah said as we made love in my bed, the candles creating dancing shadows on the walls. No supernatural presence disturbed us anymore, only the feeling of being blessed by love that had transcended death itself. I traced patterns on her skin, marveling at how this brilliant woman had chosen me, chosen us. Chosen to fight for something real in a world that still sometimes made love complicated. "I love you," she whispered against my neck as we moved together, our bodies finding rhythms that spoke deeper than words. "I love you too," I replied, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them, with the strength of women who'd learned that authentic love was worth any sacrifice. Outside my windows, the prairie stretched endlessly under stars that had witnessed generations of hidden love stories. But this one, our story, would not be hidden anymore. 6 months later, Sarah's belongings had completely merged with mine, in the cabin that now felt like our home rather than my refuge. Her historical maps covered the walls alongside my bird photographs, creating a visual timeline of how love had transformed our separate lives into something beautifully shared. "The permits came through," she announced, bursting into our joint office with official paperwork clutched in her hands. "We can officially launch the Hidden Histories Nature Walk program next month." I looked up from the tour guide materials I'd been creating, grinning at her excitement. Our business proposal had been ambitious, combining my expertise in prairie wildlife with Sarah's historical research to create educational tours that honored forgotten stories while showcasing Kansas' natural beauty. "The first group is already booked," I said, showing her our registration list. 12 people, including 3 couples specifically interested in LGBTQ history. Sarah's eyes shone with pride. Margaret and Eleanor would be amazed that their story is bringing people together instead of tearing them apart. We'd spent months researching other hidden love stories from Kansas history, uncovering a network of relationships that had been erased from official records. Our tours would visit sites where forbidden love had flourished in secret, while teaching participants about the wildlife that had witnessed those human dramas. The doorbell interrupted our planning, and I opened it to find Marcus holding a bottle of champagne and wearing his biggest grin. "Heard through the grapevine that you two made the local newspaper," he announced, inviting himself in like always. "Front page of the lifestyle section, talking about your new business venture." He was right. The Wichita Eagle had featured our Hidden Histories Nature Walk program as an example of innovative tourism that educated while entertaining. The article included a photograph of Sarah and me standing beside Margaret. His grave, now marked with a proper headstone we'd commissioned. Margaret Riley and Eleanor Hutchins, Lovers and Dreamers, 1917 to 1946. Sarah read the inscription aloud for the 100th time, finally getting the recognition they deserved. That afternoon found us back at the Autumn Food Festival where we first met, but this time as partners in every sense of the word. The same artisanal donut vendor recognized us from the previous year. "You two are back," she said with a knowing smile. "I remember you sharing those last donuts." "Best decision we ever made," Sarah replied, squeezing my hand. We walked through the festival grounds hand in hand, no longer strangers discovering attraction, but established lovers, comfortable in our connection. Other couples smiled at us, recognizing something authentic in our easy affection. "Remember when you offered to guide me to historical sites?" Sarah asked, as we found a quiet spot beneath the same oak trees where we'd eaten our shared donuts a year ago. "I thought it would be a simple consultation," I admitted. 3 days of walking through prairie grass, maybe some academic discussion about bird migration patterns. Instead, you got a haunted historian with relationship baggage and supernatural encounters. Best deal I ever made. Sarah laughed, that rich sound that still made my heart skip beats. Even with Jessica's harassment, the ghostly interventions, the career drama, especially because of all that. I pulled her closer on the picnic blanket we'd spread. Fighting for us made me realize what we had was worth fighting for. The setting sun painted the festival in golden light, families and couples, enjoying the same simple pleasures that had brought us together. Children ran between booths while musicians played folk songs on a makeshift stage. "I have something for you," Sarah said, reaching into her jacket pocket. She pulled out a small wooden box, carved in the same intricate pattern as the one we'd found in her grandmother's attic. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a simple silver ring engraved with 2 birds in flight. "It's not an engagement ring," she said quickly. "Not yet, anyway. But it's a promise ring. A promise that whatever comes next, we face it together." I slipped the ring onto my finger, feeling its weight like an anchor to everything we'd built. "It's perfect." The jeweler said the birds represent freedom and partnership, the ability to soar individually while choosing to migrate together. Our kiss there beneath the oak trees tasted like cinnamon sugar and promises. Around us, the festival continued its celebration of simple pleasures and human connections, but we existed in our own bubble of contentment. "Next year," Sarah murmured against my lips, "we'll bring our first anniversary tour group here. Show them where 2 women found love over disputed donuts. Think they'll believe the story? They'll believe the important parts." She traced the ring on my finger with gentle touches. "That love finds a way, even in the most unexpected places. That sometimes the best things in life start with sharing something sweet with a stranger." As darkness fell and festival lights began twinkling like earthbound stars, we packed up our picnic and headed home to the cabin, where our love story continued writing itself each day. The past had taught us about courage, the present gave us joy, and the future stretched ahead like the endless Kansas prairie, full of possibilities we'd explore together.